All right, in today's video, I'm going to define energy and a few specific kinds of energy. So energy is just the ability to do. And what I mean by that is to just do something, like, the ability to stand, the ability to run, the ability to throw a ball, the ability to think, the ability to get out of bed in the morning. Um, to do things, right? And anything that we do takes energy. We kind of know that inherently. We're used to that idea. Um, and so my hope is that this definition makes sense, right? Energy is the ability to do things. It takes energy to do something. Okay. The more you want to do, the more energy it takes. And now I'm going to go into a couple of different kinds of energy. I'm going to start with uh, thermal energy. So thermal energy is heat. It's the internal energy of something. So, for example, if we had, a cup of water, um, inside the water, the molecules are kind of bouncing around. And then they're bouncing around with some average speed. We call that temperature. But they're also bouncing around with some amount of energy, right? Remember, it takes energy to do something. It takes energy to move around. And we call that energy heat energy. Uh, and this should make sense, right? Because if we took, you know, this uh, cup of water and we put it, over a fire, uh, the cup would heat up. um, and what would happen? Well, the water in that cup, the molecules would start to move faster, right? And I'll draw kind of big arrows. They would have more internal energy, they would have more thermal energy because they heated up, right? That's all thermal energy is, just heat. Um, Kind of similar to thermal energy, we have kinetic energy. So kinetic energy is the energy of movement. The difference here being that we're not talking about the movement of our internal atoms. We're talking about the movement of the system, the movement of our object, right? So, for example, it could be the movement of a ball that we threw, right? The faster we threw the ball, the more energy it took to throw the ball, the more energy the ball has. That kind of energy is kinetic energy. It's the energy associated with movement. In general, the faster something's moving, the more kinetic energy it has. Um, and then we have potential energy. And potential energy is actually a really interesting one because not only is potential energy a special kind of energy, there's different kinds of potential energy. Um, so potential energy is a stored energy, and energy can be stored in a lot of different ways. We can store energy, um, for example, by stacking a book on a shelf, right? So if I put a book on a shelf, it actually has stored energy. And we can see that because what happens if the, if we were to remove the shelf holding it, right? If we got rid of the shelf, what would the book do? We know the answer to this question, right? It would fall. And as it starts falling, what does it start doing? Well, it starts moving, which means it's got, it would start to gain kinetic energy. Where's this energy coming from? Well, it turns out, right, that we can't actually create or destroy energy, so that energy must have been stored somewhere. In this case, right, we say it was stored as gravitational potential energy. Okay, that's the energy that is stored because of height. right? Because of how far you are away from the Earth. Uh, we know that we kind of stick to the Earth because of gravity, right? So if you're sitting in a chair right now, you're actually able to sit in that chair because of gravity. If you were in space where gravity is really, really low, you would float right out of your chair. There wouldn't be a lot of energy stored. But on Earth, um, you know, that is different. And things that are higher up, right, are going to hit the ground moving more quickly, right, with more energy. Therefore, things that are higher up have a higher gravitational potential energy. We also have chemical potential energy. We're not going to get too much into that in this class. This is more the subject of chemistry. When you take this next year, it's gonna you'll talk about things like H2O, right, which is actually water, which is like a hydrogen bonded with an oxygen. Let me draw it like this, which is a hydrogen bonded with an oxygen bonded with a hydrogen. And you can actually, break these bonds, right? They can be broken. Um, and there's energy associated with breaking those bonds. This is actually when you eat, right? Kind of how you get energy from food, right? There's energy stored up in food as chemical potential energy, and you can release that. Um, your body has ways to release that. So kind of cool. You might have learned about some of this in biology, actually, and definitely you will learn more in chemistry. So kind of a cool biology, chemistry, physics connection here is chemical potential energy. Um, Elastic potential energy, this is another one that we'll get into a little bit, and this is the energy, if you were to let's say, if you had a spring and you compress the spring with a block or something. So then, right, like if you push this block down, right, the spring would compress a certain distance. And what would happen if you let go of this block? Well, you know what would happen. The block would fly off because the spring is compressed. Thought of another way, think of a rubber band, right? When you if you've got a rubber band just kind of sitting around like this, and you stretch it out, right? What's going to happen when you let go of that rubber band? It's going to snap, right? And depending on how far you stretch it, it might hurt a little bit, right? The further out you stretch it, the more energy you store in it as elastic potential energy. Similar to a spring, the further down you squish it, um, the more elastic potential energy you're storing, right? It's taking energy to compress that spring, and it's being stored as elastic potential energy. And when you let go, you release that energy. Um, yeah, and so you could, potentially let that rubber band fly across the room and hit an annoying classmate in the face, or um, or a teacher, perhaps, like I used to do in grade school. So these are just like, there are other kinds of potential energy, but for the purpose of this video, um, that's where we're going to stop.